Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today let's talk about the long list for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction. So, the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction is my favourite literary prize. I have been reading along with it for like 6 years. I think this will be the 7th time I read along with the Walter Scott Prize. I think it is a fantastic prize that celebrates a wonderful historical fiction, and I just have really enjoyed reading along with it for the past few years. So the Walter Scott Prize is a prize for historical fiction, and the sort of definition it uses is that the majority of the storyline has to be set at least 60 years before the book is published. I generally find that the Walter Scott Prize has really strong and varied long lists with a mix of sort of more reading group accessible historical fiction and the more sort of high literary stuff that you're more likely to see on prize lists. They often have stuff from really small presses, which is really lovely to see. And last year's 2025 long list was so strong for me personally that 6 books from the long list, like literally half of the long list, were in my like favourite books of the year video. I loved last year's long list, and I am excited for this year's long list. What I usually do when I read along with the Walter Scott Prize is I see what books are on the long list when the long list is announced, pick and choose some of the books that I want to read, and then I read the whole shortlist. So I usually end up reading sort of 9 or 10 books out of the long list of 12 rather than all 12, but I do read the whole shortlist. And I thought today I would have a chat about what's on the long list for 2026. Now, for the last couple of years, I have done a predictions video where I predict what books I think are going to be on the Walter Scott Prize long list. But this year, the Walter Scott Prize announced their long list like 2 weeks earlier than they usually do. So I didn't manage to do my predictions video. I planned my predictions video in full. I had my list of predictions, and then just when I was about to sit down and film that predictions video, the Walter Scott Prize announced their long list. So I feel like there's not much point in making that predictions video now, but I would like it noted that I did correctly guess 4 of the long list, which is weird because in 2024 and 2025 I also correctly guessed 4 books from the long list. So that is clearly just the amount of books from the Walter Scott Prize long list that I can guess. So anyway, let's go through together the long list of 12 books. I will talk through what the books are about, whether or not I'm excited to read them, whether they were books I predicted will be on the long list or not, and I'll make for myself a little bit of a reading plan. As I said, I will probably read a couple of these before the shortlist is announced in April, and then I will read the full shortlist before the winner is announced in June. So the first book on the long list is Venetian Vespers by John Banville, which is set at the turn of the 20th century in Venice and is about a English journalist and an American heiress who are on their honeymoon, and I think sinister things happen. That's the impression that I get. I can get this one from the library, but it's probably not hugely calling to me. It wouldn't be my priority from the list, so I will probably wait and see whether or not this one makes the shortlist. The next book on the long list, and one that I predicted would be on the long list, is The Two Roberts by Damien Barr. This book is set in Glasgow in the 1930s and is about 2 men, both called Robert, who meet each other at art school. And apparently it is a story of art and class, devotion and obsession, which sounds very interesting. I gather that the 2 Roberts fall in love, and that the story spans like from the early 1930s through to the Second World War. So this sounds like a really interesting story for me, and I am very keen to read this. I would say The Two Roberts is very high up my priority list, and I've heard very good things about it. So I think I will be getting this one out of the library and reading it before the shortlist is announced. The next book on the long list is Eden Shore by Oisin Fagan. This is a novel set in the late 18th century about an Irishman who travels to Brazil with the intention of setting up a utopian commune there. This one sounds really intriguing. It's not one I've heard much about, but the premise does sound really interesting. I don't think I have access to it, so it's probably slightly lower down my priority list, but it does sound really interesting, so we will see. And the next book on the long list, which is another one I did predict, is Helm by Sarah Hall. I'm really excited to see this on the long list because I was hoping it would be on the long list. I thought it might be, but I also wasn't 100% sure whether it would qualify because of the strange structure and like premise of this book. So Helm is the name of a wind, like the name of a gust of wind in Cumbria. And Helm, the novel, is about the folklore that surrounds this wind. And its story over time from like the Neolithic period to the present day. So I think there is some kind of present day storyline, but it's also about like the folklore and history of this gust of wind, which sounds quite weird, but kind of amazing. So I'm very pleased to see this one on the list. I have seen this one about and heard good things about it, and I think I can get this one from the library. So this is high up on my list, and I'm pretty hopeful I'll get to it soon. Then the next book on the long list, another one I predicted and I'm pleased to see here and really hoping to read soon, is The Pretender by Joe Harkin. So this book is set in 15th century England during the reign of King Richard III, and it's about a boy who is being raised and engineered to be a pretender to the throne. I have heard very good things about The Pretender. It sounds really intriguing. It's another one I think I can get from the library. Like, this one's been fairly popular, and yeah, I'm very pleased to see this on the list, and I'm really looking forward to it. I hope that I will really like this one. Next book on the list is Boundary Waters by Tristan Hughes. This is set in Canada in the early 19th century, and is apparently a tragic comedy about a young man who gets involved in the fur trade and sort of travels around Canada. This sounds really interesting. Probably not like top of my list, but if I can get my hands on it, it does sound like it would be a really interesting read. Next up is The Matchbox Girl by Alice Jolly, which is set in Vienna in the 1930s and sounds really, really interesting. So this is based on the real story and the real history behind Dr. Asperger, who was kind of an important but very controversial figure within the development of diagnoses of autism. And I'm assuming that the young girl who is the like center of this story is fictional, though Dr. Asperger is not. That's my assumption, but I might be wrong about that. But it's about a young girl and her experiences being treated by Dr. Asperger, but also this is in the late 1930s when the threat of Nazi invasion is becoming stronger in Vienna, and it sounds like that's an important element of the book as well. I haven't heard of this book, but it sounds fascinating, so if I can get my hands on a copy, I would really like to read this one. This is probably quite high up my priority list. The next book on the long list is Eden Glassy by Melissa Lukashenko, and this book is set partly in 19th century and partly in 21st century Brisbane in Australia, which was originally called Eden Glassy. It sounds like the 19th century section will look at the tensions between the indigenous community and colonial settlers, and the 21st century strand has some sort of links back to the past. This one sounds like a really, really interesting book, and I'm hoping to read this very soon. The Read Good Challenge, which is a yearly reading challenge run by Ben Reads Good, the prompt for February is to read a book by an Australian author. So if I manage to read Eden Glassy by the end of February, I could count this book for that prompt. So that's probably going to encourage me to pick it up even sooner. I've already placed a hold on this at the library, so hopefully I'll be reading this really soon. The next book on the list is Ben Beckeler by Graham McCrae Burnett, which is set in the 19th century on a remote Scottish island, and it's about a man who is tried for killing his family. But the story is kind of told through the eyes of his brother, who has survived. This sounds like quite a dark and intriguing book. It's probably not top of my list, but it does sound interesting, so I think I will see how many of these I managed to get to and what ends up on the shortlist. The next book on the list is Once the Deed is Done by Rachel Seifert, which is set in 1945, immediately after the collapse of the Nazi regime, and it's about a Red Cross volunteer who has arrived at a German factory where people from Poland and Ukraine have been brought to carry out forced labour. This sounds like a really tough and difficult read, but a really powerful one potentially too. So if I can manage to get my hands on this, it sounds like a really interesting book. Then the penultimate book on the long list is The Artist by Lucy Steeds. This is the other novel that I predicted would be on the long list because I have seen it absolutely everywhere. It was Waterstone's book of the year, I think. It was definitely one of their books of the month, and there were just piles of it everywhere in every Waterstones you went into for a while. So The Artist is set in France in the 1920s and is about, I think, the relationship between an artist and an aspiring journalist. And I don't know whether or not I am excited to read this. This is one of those books that I have seen absolutely everywhere and felt very little desire to read, but I'm not really sure why. I don't know if it's just the reaction to the fact that I see it everywhere, or whether it's about the fact that it is about an artist and about art. I love a novel about literature and I love a novel about music, but I do find that whenever I read a novel about visual art, I just don't really get on with that. I'm not hugely interested in visual art. I'm not hugely into it. I also have very little visual imagination, so reading a description of a painting is not exciting for me. I don't know how much The Artist is actually about the art itself or is more about the character. I don't know, but I feel like for a book that I have seen everywhere, I have felt uninclined towards it. So I would be interested to know if anyone has read The Artist, if you liked it, what you thought of it, if it's very arty or not. I have in my head that this is not going to be a book for me, but I may be wrong, and I'm willing to be proved wrong. I might wait and see whether or not this ends up on the shortlist, but equally, if you loved it and would like to recommend it to me, that would be useful to know. And then finally, the last book on the shortlist is Seascraper by Benjamin Wood. Now, I have seen this book about, and when I was putting together my predictions video for the World Scott Prize Longlist, which I, as I said earlier, didn't end up making, I saw this book a few times and was like, oh, maybe. And then I was like, oh no, I don't actually think that is historical. But it obviously is historical because it's on this long list. I'm not quite sure when it's set. I think it must be 20th century, but I'm not sure when within the 20th century. This is apparently the story of a man called Thomas who spends his life selling shrimp, which is what his sort of grandfather has done before him, but he really wants to be a musician. This one, as far as I can see, is really, really short. My library has the audiobook, and I think it's only 4 or 5 hours. So I could definitely squeeze this one in. I feel like I've heard good things about this, but I also didn't seem to know that it was historical, so I obviously can't have heard that much about it. But the fact this one is very short means I'm almost certain to find some time to read it. So this is probably pretty high up on my list. There we go. That's the end of the long list. Lots of exciting, interesting sounding books on there. So of the long list of 12, I have picked out the 6 that I think I am keenest to read, the 6 that I am most likely to read before the shortlist is announced. I doubt I'll read all 6 of them before the shortlist is announced, but I will try and read some of them before the shortlist is announced. And those 6 are The Two Roberts, Helm, The Pretender, The Matchbox Girl, Eden Glassy, and Seascraper. I think all of those sound really interesting. They're probably the ones on the long list that are calling out to me the most, but I will see what ends up on the shortlist and read all of them too, as I usually do. What I usually do when I'm reading along with the World Scott Prize is make a review video sort of after I've read 2 or 3 books and tell you about them together, so I will try and do that again this year. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading these. I obviously haven't read any of them already, so do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these, what you thought of them, if you think I'll like them, and if there's any that you would especially like to recommend. And otherwise, I think that's all for now. Do let me know if you are reading along with the World Scott Prize, or if any of these books particularly interest you, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.